Welcome, sales team leaders or principals that are still running a sales team. This is, we switched Cream Confer or Cream Stream online and switched that over here into STEAMroom this week, namely because from the last episode, which was number 8, we're now into number 9, and we're in that last or the final quarter of the year. Just a recap on that. And as I said, and as I have been talking to salespeople or sales personnel, if you like, at all levels, from sales associate through property careers prospector school, up into sales trainer mentor, list and sell online, of course, and then all the way up to real estate rock stars with our high performance or peak performance professionals. I've made a big deal about this final quarter. Of course, we start with Rocktober. We're right at the end now. And Rocktober has a kind of a double meaning. It really started, or the beginnings of it were centered around our real estate rock stars. And Rocktober was that big month where we talked and met. But it does have a double meaning in that rock being the platform which you bounce or you set the foundation for this quarter and importantly the next. So often I see real estate teams, and if not real estate teams, quite often sales people, as they come into this last quarter, if they don't set up well inside of October, hence the word Rocktober, they get into November, they really don't get any traction there. But even worse, as it heads into December, if they haven't got that bounce month to get them through the quarter, they also kind of rob themselves of the setup that they need in January come the new year. So to avoid this, what we've focused very, very heavily on, and those of you that may have not been too sure what I was up with your sales team, of course, those in the Cream operating system, which I have a lot to do with the salespeople around this. This is why, especially those states or those areas that have been affected by the restrictions imposed around certain lockdowns, and I know they've all been at varying levels, but you know, let's face it, we've got a marketplace no matter where you are, with the exception, I say, Perth seems to be not affected at all, but at least even Adelaide's actually had more of an effect around this. But the reality is that those restrictions are starting to lift. There's going to be some positivity around that, but we're also in danger of everybody putting it off or going back to that undersupply which we've been faced with. And a lot of sellers, sadly, are making the assumption that their property is not only easy to sell, but the market itself will be relatively static, if not continue to escalate going forward. Now, I don't know how long that'll last. I'm certain that the ramifications and the economic effect that COVID will have as it starts to auger in, as various states and also areas that have been largely affected by lockdown restrictions start to lose their stimulus, where you know the government's been supporting them with emergency payments and all this sort of stuff, that economic effect will eventually, it has to translate to a slowing inside and around these real estate markets. Where does that leave us? Well, I still think it's opportunity, and I say, as I've said all the way along, you can either run at it or run from it. We've chosen to run at it. We've chosen to capitalize on this opportunity. So I've been focused very much with all of the people that I work with in training at all levels, fundamentally around sticking with identification of active property sellers. Now, this is something we used to refer to active property sellers as those that were on your listings to get list or your chase list, you know, those listings which you are hunting down, those sellers that you've either presented to or want to present to, but have identified themselves as wanting to make a move. So there's two major features that I have focused upon. The first is to get to that identification point, I've worked very heavily on centering that focal point in and around sales inquiry, any activity that's occurred around open for inspections, notwithstanding that those open for inspections were held up in and around lockdowns and restrictions, but they're back in vogue and we are communicating and identifying sellers. And once they do, to ensure that the conversation is, strictly speaking, centric to the motive, where people are coming from, what they're trying to do, not getting our knickers in a knot around the fact that, you know, people are saying, oh, I need to find something to buy first because of that Mexican standoff. We understand that's all going through. But as I have said, is once you've built that active property seller list, your APS chase list to 25 plus, you basically have the foundation to set this quarter in play and then move forward. Of course, the more the merrier. I was only talking to my good friend Glenn Taylor over there in Whangaparoa in New Zealand, and we're talking about his list coming up. He's identified about 80. Now, you've got to remember, we're talking about a salesperson that is in the top 0.5% of estate agents, whether it be Australia or New Zealand. And of course, he's been in the game for a number of years and his list is relatively high. But we were even having a bit of a chuckle about it. I said, well, mate, you don't really need that many because we just need to keep your productivity in the space that it needs to be. So roughly, you know, I think it's got to be at 25 or better. And then ideally, if it comes in somewhere between there and 40, I think would just be sensational. And that's the number for them to work on. Now, they're going to be wrong with some of these, but I'm saying that we're identifying those that are going to be looking to sell definitely in this quarter, notwithstanding the fact that we're talking to them in October, which is that rocks, that bounce month. And then moving across to those that might be selling in the new year. Now, we're going to make that dissemination now. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about, or the big thing that I want to talk about here this evening, is Nocember. Nocember, and those of you that have been following what we do, has been going on for several years now. But basically what we do is, rather than having this disaster or nothing month that can sometimes be okay, but at other times not be so good, invariably I find it's just like an in-between month, because if it is good, nearly always January goes slow or something like that. So I just decided some time ago to just meld November and December in together to form Nocember and avoid a lot of the productivity doldrums that can confront us. Certainly, even as a team, I'm not talking about, I just kind of permeates every level. Certainly those property sellers that are out there, the moment they hear December, they kind of go off. Some of them even start to talk about it late November. As you probably no doubt know, when you go into retail establishments, they can sometimes be playing Christmas carols as early as November. And this can often have the psychological effect of people just saying, I'll leave it to next year, which doesn't serve us well. Of course, property sellers keep buying. We as sales team leaders want our team to be productive and secure listings. Doesn't matter if they don't sell either side of Christmas, but you don't want to miss the opportunities in and around listings. Now, from the team's perspective, you know, the moment we start to hear the Christmas jingle in vogue, you know, we can even go, if not practically, physically, we can start to refrain from the productivity we need to do mentally. So we mentally withdraw and our head goes on holidays. And so often you see that 1 in 4 syndrome I speak so very often about. That's where we start, you know, we shift our focus and we have that 1 good month in 4, 2 ordinary months, and a disaster that covers it out. How to avoid that? How to lift consistency? Well, a large part of that is solved in planning, most definitely, whether it be for a quarterly month. So again, as we get toward the end of the year, we've not only got next quarter to plan for, but mentally, again, we're looking at the new year and we've got to start setting goals, objective meetings, you know, goals and targets for the new year. I'll talk about that as we progress in coming weeks. But I just want to start with solving this idea of not having the productivity doldrums so that we sell all the way up to Christmas. As we get toward Christmas Eve, call it quits, have the break, but have everything set up so that when you start anywhere that you might choose, somewhere between the 1st and maybe as late as the 10th of January, but you start with a bang and the productivity is in play. We're going to have quite often up to a 2-week gap in the middle, end of December into the front part of January. And we just want to make sure that either side of that, the productivity is running up to a finish and then kicks off beautifully in January. So it is, I start to bring up a couple of things that we really need to put all of our energy around setting this up. So the first thing is that you want to do is set a planning meeting. And I've hoped that you've actually gone ahead and done that, set that up for this week. It was only last evening I sent out en masse a copy of what I call is a memo that you need to send to all of your sales personnel, which kind of precedes the fact that we are going to be setting or having a planning meeting. And that planning meeting is an extraordinary one in that it's a little bit different from those that are run of the mill. And of course, if you've not had planning meetings or you don't have planning meetings, we'll start no better time than now to get on top of it. The bottom line is, you know, they say that there's 2 great things that you can muck up. That's not failing to have planned or never planned at all. You've got to start somewhere. So this memo is pretty straightforward. It just more or less explains that we're going to have an extraordinary month where we combine November and December into a 7-week month. The reason we're going to do that is to avoid these things, and then asks each of the salespeople to start to prepare for that meeting. And to do that, they need to prepare that list I spoke about, that exhaustive list of about 25 sellers. And then what I want them to do prior to getting to the meeting is to ask of and about the property sellers that feature on that list some very specific questions, and arrive at the meeting with the answers to these questions. And the first one is, what or where do those active property sellers, what are they trying to do or where they're trying to go? So basically the motive, invariably that's just going to pop up and provide the superficial motive. But the more we actually know what's going on there, and indeed for you as a sales team leader, if the salespeople are able to tell you what they're doing and what they're planning to go, well, then we know that the conversation has centered around motive and we are a fighting chance. The second part of that is the second part of the motive. Why do they want to do this? Why on earth would they be wanting to do it? You've got to be a bit careful, and I flagged that for them, why it is that they want to make that move. And that's just drilling down through the layers and checking for the validity of that particular motive. But then importantly, then this is the big question that we want answered as sales team leaders, and that is, when must the property seller achieve this by? What is, if there is any, what deadline do they have? And this leads us to the next one, where we start to ask about these sellers, or maybe even directly to them if we think it's pertinent. Do they want to be moved before Christmas or indeed after Christmas? Now, this allows you to look at that active property seller list and start to create a dissemination of those that we have to act on now, get in play in through Nocember, and hopefully get a result, as opposed to those that we will prepare and set up for once we get back. Hence, now I believe that you can see as a sales team leader, my rationale behind having that list prepared. So then once you've actually got the team and you've got them ready around that meeting, I reckon it ought to be sort of anywhere from Wednesday to Thursday of this week before we move into December, that they have these lists prepared. Many of the guys that we've been working with, they've been on top of that, so we should be A-okay. And then from that motive, we can then move to the meeting. And I just want to prepare you as a leader around first and foremost, the order of events or your action list around controlling the team and everything else associated with it, and the actual agenda that you will be running at that planning meeting and what you want to come away from that meeting with. So first and foremost, what I also, and this is just a tip, and if you haven't done it already now, can I please urge you to consider very carefully what I'm about to say. A lot of companies like to have their Christmas party early in December. Some even are as crazy enough to have it in late November, so they get it out of the way and they could get back to work. But I kind of think that the worst thing you could do is have a Christmas party, which for all the people in the company signifies the year's end and can put you in the dangerous position as to people, their heads kind of going on holidays. To my mind, the most important three things, the key dates that you need to announce and make absolutely clear, and it sits atop of the agenda for the Nocember planning meeting. First of all, the Christmas party, and make sure that's very close, if not on the last day before you close for the Christmas break. You also need to all set in place the definitive dates of the holiday break. We will be breaking, whether it be the 20th or the 21st or the 23rd, or even if it's Christmas Eve, which of course is the 24th, and then when you will be reopening. And if you're going to run a half-base staff or whatever it is, that roster is out and on the table now, this week. So everyone knows the dates that they're working around. There's clear, there's no question and answers, and everyone, and all you got to say to people is this: when we're on, we're on; when we're off, we're off. So that Christmas party, given that can now signify the last day of work, in my opinion, solves most of the problems. We then want to just check, well, if you've been running planning meetings, go through the previous actions. So it would have been already on my list from last week's planning that people turn up to this meeting with their APS list up to date, and that they've got to have at least a minimum of 25. Doesn't matter if you're learning this for the first time, don't forget to do it next year so that you're on top of it. I then move into setting the goals and targets. Now, when I'm setting the goals and targets for salespeople, remember that we want those goals, benchmarked. So this is the goals, remembering the goals are mandatory in the same way that you can't get someone half pregnant. There's no such thing as half a goal. So by their very nature, when we're setting the listings and sales targets, they are conservative because they are also compulsory. I don't let people run away with these. Targets, on the other hand, are largely aspirational. I have no problem with them. But for Nocember, as a minimum, I say that those targets, let me rephrase that, those goals need to be benchmarked at least 1.5 times what they typically would be in any given month. This is the whole idea of achieving and turning Nocember into a much better month if you had separated November and December, and one's good and one's terrible. So we want those goals to be around those numbers. Now, as far as targets goes, they're largely aspirational. Let them have their head. They can measure these against their best month ever, and I'm okay. If there needs to be any adjustment around pricing or expectation around that on any listings that fall into what we call those that where they want to be gone before Christmas, and this would mostly pertain, I believe, to those listings that are already on board. And if you're seeing some sort of balking there, well, maybe we have to push them in and address the pricing problem very early. And I would be doing that this week, in fact, before we move into November, or the beginning, as we're now calling it, of Nocember. So we can, as I said, you can discuss those aspirational targets, set those in place, and you collate the team goals and team targets together. Make sure they're on a whiteboard. If you haven't understood the power of having on public display a scoreboard that clearly shows productivity numbers in numbers of listings and sales, please go back to a previous recording, take a look at it, and get your control board up there. This will bite you on the backside if you don't have this sort of thing in place. We then move to the active property seller lists, and what we're looking to do is ensure that salespeople have built an exhaustive list of those that they've identified, that number's at least 25, that we do have contact points with these people, notably, and in this order, quite frankly, their mobile telephone number, their email address, and then hopefully we know, obviously, the actual address of the property question that they will be moving from, the one that they will be perhaps putting on the market. Then we want to determine the status as we can through discussion of each property. Are they a before or are they an after Christmas? If we don't know, let's not get too upset about that. I think the identification of that will take care of itself, and I'll soon show you how we do that. And then we establish a reinforcement product marketing medium. And I'm going to move into that. We show you how to do it. And then we commit activities to actions, to the action list. Of course, this will be with your agenda the same way it is with your sales team meeting. So every time someone agrees to do something, make sure you are documenting this down inside of that action list. You then need to build your FAB property list, FAB standing for find a buyer. These are obviously people that have identified themselves in the before Christmas range, and making it clear to the entire team that we have in place a list of properties where we just have to locate a buyer and move them out. Now, you might think this is all pretty straightforward. Well, I can assure you it's not. By having this meeting and documenting it down and being crystal clear on the actions we have to take and the prospects that we have. If you have a salesperson that does not have a list of 25, if you don't think they can readily build that list of 25 in the next week, I would be committing them to strong prospecting activity, in particular, activity that immediately pertains to presence marketing and raising that presence over that Christmas break leading in so that they get off to a flying start in the new year. Now, we then move into Prospector 4, and there's some, the typical run-of-the-mill stuff. So if there needs to be foothold activity around presence marketing, whether it be the for sale card, the Fat Boy, for sale card is the replication of your for sale sign that you're putting up there. Fat Boy is the targeted letter that aims at main arterial roads for us to get listings on there so that we've got good exposure right across that marketplace. PMBX, which of course is the just listed card that we distribute around competitor listings. Amazing grace. We won't go into that now. I don't have time. For sale by owners is secondary processes like to let by owners, or secondary protocols, I should say, or rather agent sign down. Of course, if we've got new listings that are coming new to market, very heavy emphasis on regenerative protocols. The property seller's research guide that needs to go out. LA Woman, which is the just listed card that needs to go out before the for sale sign goes up. Welcome home invitations. If you've still got restrictions in your area around open for inspections, this does not mean that you can't send out a modified welcome home invitation that says that they can privately view the property. This can have the same net effect with any prospective seller that you want to get on board. Then you might move into momentum tasks. Any salesperson that's got good results, ensuring that they are getting those accolades, that they're getting those recommendations, that they're getting those testimonials, and you're feeding those back into the market. We only had 3 or 4 this week. Nick Saparovich had some out in his marketplace, and we're getting good response off his Facebook margin ads that are coming in, and people are asking for the property seller's research guide and things just like that. This is working a treat, folks. And then finally, but by no means least, once you've got that list, and although you probably used to be saying, try to push hard to get the appointment, if people have indicated to you that they're before Christmas, just move into this space and get this, which is basically the automation protocols that need to be overseen by the company. And what we call these are the pre-list active property seller contacts, of which there are 9 in total. The first one that you want to get out is the Property Sellers Research Guide. This is basically your product statement, a brochure, if you like, that actually points out what your company is about and what professional services it provides and in what capacity. So I'll just rehash that quickly, although I've said it a bunch of times. The major thing that it does is it explains the difference between comparative value and market value. It explains that whilst comparative value is important and something we need to consider, it is not what you receive as a seller. What you do receive is market value. Market value can be influenced by what we call value variables. Some of those are beyond your control. So things like fiscal policy, which I've just noticed in the last couple of weeks, that the lending institutions are changing the lending criteria. This has actually been by the regulators at the request of the regulators to slow or take the heat out of the market. And of course, it's now, so the LVRs are changed. I've no doubt that interest rates will change and all those sorts of things, which can, and they're beyond the scope of our control, but they do have downward pressure on price. Things like supply and demand, we've already seen the ramifications of that at the moment, and a whole range of other things. But the things that we can influence, they are the value variables that we have total control over, of course, are marketing, the perception you create of value, negotiation, your ability to negotiate a price and how you handle buyers, and of course your communicative technique, so the way in which you communicate back and forth with buyers. So that's that document, and that needs to go out. The second point on our pre-list APS is that your SMS results in real time. So if you are moving people, make sure that the SMS texts are going out. We have templates for this. You are more than welcome to contact me around it, and ensure that those texts do not harp or focus on selling properties quickly, and certainly not around price. Make them more about satisfying motives and getting people moved in a timely fashion, so they were never actually caught out, not having a place to go to and having their place sold. This gives them confidence. Then the big one, and the one that's been well received, and I did send to a lot of our sales team leaders, the cover letter that goes out with this, but we are doing now what we call, excuse me, a preliminary comparative market analysis. And this is one that we send out ahead of even going to meet them. It is devoid of any opinion from us or the agency or the individual salesperson. And it explains that it is merely comparative value and that they will be. So it echoes all the sentiments that we pushed out there in the Property Sellers Research Guide, the PSRG. But it creates a fantastic platform for good conversation, for good exchange between you and that active property seller. We then invite them to come and see one of our welcome homes, our open for inspection. So an invitation goes out along with another cover letter that we've now got in design. And of course, it doesn't matter whether this active property seller comes to it. It's just the fact that you've invited them. This is all starting to stack up. So what I've been teaching all of the salespeople, all of the sales operatives basically, is that they need to see themselves as these active property sellers are seeing them. And if they're a standout against, and they're doing all the things I'm talking about here, they become a complete standout against the opposition and negate the possibility of those competitors getting under your guard. We then talked about the two-view platform is the individual property websites. If you're a subscriber to Property Marketer, you are able to utilize this as an advantage and something they will be given over and above and they don't have to pay for. It's been a fantastic medium for those agents where they've been in lockdown and haven't been able to promote properties because they've not been able to get photographers out or like. So we've done like a bit of a DIY version, and this has allowed us to engage property buyers on behalf of these active property sellers and has actually caused those sellers to list with us. The Market Roundup, which of course is your monthly newsletter that tells them how the market is and what gives them a smattering of sales, and then is you know, they've got a smattering of your accolades of people that you've sold property with. Then we have the Property Marketer case studies. There's more on this in the coming weeks as we move into Nocember, because everything that I'm talking about sits inside an action list, and all of this will be coming later in Nocember. I urge you, if you don't have this action list, I'll be sending that out to all of our Cream operating system clients. If you're not one and would like to discuss that with me, give me a call. I'm not going to withhold it. You know, I'd be delighted to show you, even if you're not a subscriber to Property Marketer and you want to makeshift something else around it. I have no problem with that. Just get in contact with me. I'll give you my address and contact details at the end, and I'm more than happy to run this through. Finally, but by no means last, that we send them information on specific buyers. Now, this is much more than just doing one of those good old, you know, buyer matches, excuse me, one of those good old buyer matches. It's actually naming specific buyers for their properties, saying that should the property come to market, that these will be brought right through. It's so important that you do give these buyers a name and a face. You don't have to give contact details, but by doing this, you are, I guess, eliminating, or at the very least mitigating, the chance of one of your competitors getting under your guard and saying that we could sell the property off market, which why anyone would want to do that is beyond me. If they were educated, and certainly if I got hold of them before they decided to put their property on the market in an off market arrangement, I reckon just about none of them would if they spent 15 minutes with it, because they are seriously running the risk of devaluing the property. So basically what you want to do is you want to hold this meeting that I've just talked about, go through it. You want to set this thing, set the wheels in motion. So if you have that Wednesday, Thursday this week, the 1st of Nocember comes in the new week. We have the plan in place. You then immediately, now that you should have your active property seller lists up to date, as a sales team leader, you want to be across who is on that list. You've set the holiday breaks. You've set the Christmas party up. Now you just need to execute with all that good reinforced product information that's going out there. You will find that a lot of those sellers with good conversations occurring. And one of the reasons I said a minimum of 25, this means that any sales professional, once they've got that list of 25 on any given day working a 5-day week, is able to have 5 good conversations, and all of this other stuff that I'm pointing out creates the premise for them to have those conversations. I can absolutely assure you, as a team leader, as a sales team leader, you get the team working on these things, you get those that service out there, they're engaging in the conversations, you will have nothing but a very productive Nocember. And having disseminated it, you will be setting up brilliantly to move into the new year. So once again, if you want to get hold of that agenda, you'd like to see the action list that sits around it. And of course, even if you need the memo to go out pretty much straight away, you are welcome to contact me, Mark with a K, at corporatemanager.com.au, or please go right ahead and telephone me direct on +61 410 592 165. Thank you, and I look forward to catching you in the middle of Nocember, in a couple of weeks' time, on the next installment of STEAMroom. Thanks, leaders, and enjoy your company.